Hey guys, today's story is about when D&D turns into Fight Club. So, for several months, the comic book store that my friends and I played at was closed due to tax evasion, which is something fairly common where I come from. And because of this, we had a hard time finding a decent table, as we weren't willing to start a game ourselves because we were constantly fighting over DMing styles. But through another friend of ours, we learned of a kid that was organizing a form of D&D tourney. We had heard about this kid before because he had a horrible reputation for putting together big plans with awful outcomes. For example, he tried to host a party with live music in a house that he rented. His idea was to make it free to attend and charge for alcoholic beverages. And, mind you, this kid was underage, but he did manage to make the party happen. Booze and everything. And it all went to crap because the neighbors had called the cops who confiscated the booze, money, and some equipment. The bands were pissed because they were not paid as promised, and one of them actually lost some instruments and a console. I was actually there that night, and, to put it kindly, it was a death trap. So yeah. This kid, who we'll call Ferguson, was quite the entrepreneur. Anyway, this D&D tourney was supposed to be a big all-nighter that he was going to run in 1 or 2 tables with another DM. It would be a dungeon with a treasure, and the party of 3 that got to it first and managed to leave the area was the winner of a monetary prize. There was also a registration fee, and if your party won, you would make about 80% of the total fees collected. My mates Green and Newt and I decided that it was a chance to get at least some playtime in, and we spent the next 10 days coming up with a party concept that would kick butt in a dungeon crawl. And the tournament was held in, and I kid you not, in an abandoned office building. Ferguson got his hands on a generator, which he used to light what looked like an 80s corporate conference room, with some old furniture to boot. If it wasn't just all so shady, I would actually say that it was the perfect place for D&D. In the end, there was about 5 teams, and the rules were hastily explained and we got to business. Each party entered the dungeon from a different random entrance, and we would have to explore, and if we bumped into another party, PvP was allowed and encouraged. We wound up all playing under the same table, all being ran by Ferguson with his associate, who we'll call Hogface, doing the rounds, checking the sheets and making sure that no one was being dishonest. The game was played in turns, and the dungeon consisted in what seemed like endless rooms connected by passages. In each of its turns, each party would get to explore a room and, if possible, choose a passage to take. And it quickly became apparent that one of the parties was favored by Ferguson. They were getting easier puzzles or fights, and better loot. This party already killed another when they crossed paths in a room. And there was another party that was also doing extremely well as well. I can't remember the characters for the life of me, but I knew one of the players from the comic book store, who we'll call Begbie, because when I saw Trainspotting for the first time, I saw a lot of Robert Carlyle's character in this guy. Begbie had 3 moods: depressive, euphoric, and destructive. And up until now, Begbie was euphoric. His team, which included his GF and another dude, was doing fine. They were using their resources well, and seemed ready to face any sort of danger. Eventually, at a certain point, my party was killed. Nothing particularly unfair, just bad luck and decisions. And with our party being dead, Green left. But Newt and I decided to stick around to see what happened with Begbie. And before my team died, another one had perished right before ours. So, Begbie's team, as well as 2 or 3 others, were left. And amongst the remainders, one of them was the team that was clearly being favored by Ferguson, who we will call Team Fave. At a certain point, another team had found the treasure room, but had a tough fight there, and only one of the players survived, being forced to flee without the prize, so he resigned. Team Fave started finding obvious clues that pointed them towards the treasure room, and Ferguson sprung the most bullcrap trap on Bigby's team, who then had to use a lot of their resources to keep in shape. And in the next room, Ferguson declared that Bigby's team and Team Fave bumped into each other. Team Fave was in an advantageous position due to the bullcrap trap. Ferguson as DM said as much to Team Fave, and pretty much suggested that they should attack, and combat ensued. Bigby's party was actually pretty good. They always seemed to make the right choice, which helped them even the odds. And a few rounds later, both teams lost a member. Eventually, it came down to a 1v1, Bigby versus one of the Faves guys. They were both in pretty bad shape, but the guy in the favorite team threw something at Bigby. I think it was a spell, but he failed at doing so, and Bigby went for the kill. But Ferguson had made him roll a check, which, even with Bigby rolling fairly well, Ferguson had declared that he had activated a trap that killed him. At that point, there was close to 20 people in the room, and we were watching the fight intently. When we heard Ferguson mention the trap, there was nothing but silence. I think we all knew at that time that something was a little bit up. Bigby started to argue with Ferguson. Hogface, who was standing between Fave's survivor, joined the argument. A player from the other party that was killed earlier also began questioning Fave's resources. He was apparently keeping track somehow. Ferguson told Hogface to check the sheet from Fave's survivor to keep things fair. Hogface took a glance and said that everything was fine, but Bigby and Ferguson kept arguing, with Team Fave slowly moving away from the table as they didn't want to get involved. Things slowly got more and more heated, and eventually, swish! Bigby's GF took the sheet from Hogface's hand. Hogface then grabbed her by the head, and Bigby went berserk. He gave him the old 1-2, and Hogface went down, and everything boiled out of control from there. Hogface's friends jumped in, with other players joining as well, while a few others, including myself, tried to just make our way out. Newt decided to join Team Bigby, and he told me the rest of the story later that night. Newt is an unreliable narrator, so I'm sure about half of this is just plain old crap. For instance, I'm sure that he exaggerated his participation in the fight because he didn't really look like he was in a scuffle at all. His hair, which is his pride and joy, looked clean and tidy as always. So I'll just retell the story that he told, and we can split the difference. The fight was a mess. About half the people left, and the other half stayed. So it was about 10 or 12 people involved in the melee. Ferguson tried to escape with the money, but the players saw him and held him down, while Hogface's friends were dealing with Bigby's crew. Bigby's GF took a hit and fell to the floor, covering her face, which, at that point, everything stopped. She was literally the only girl present, and was under 18, so I guess everyone got scared. However, the verbal argument continued, and from what Newt could gather, at some point, one of Team Fave's members spilled the beans. Ferguson was to make sure that Team Fave won, and in return, he would get a cut, effectively doubling his profit. Hogface was obviously in on it too. So, the players got pissed, took the money from Ferguson, and split it between the teams. Fortunately, there was no more violence after this, mainly because Bigby just wanted to get his GF out of there. So, Ferguson was a walking horror story, and I wouldn't be surprised if today he's a life coach, gives TED Talks, or is in jail. Or dead. But hey, good news is I got my money back, which was redirected towards Burger King and the arcades in the following days. Well guys, what's there to really say? The OP knew that Ferguson was a piece of crap before he even went there. So I don't think that there's any surprise in the fact that this all went downhill. And there's also no need for me to really elaborate as to why Ferguson, and Hognose by extent, aren't really good DMs. So yeah, I don't really know what to say beyond I hope the injuries were fairly minor, and that nobody associated with Ferguson again after this. But hey, at least people got their money back and got some food and arcade time out of it. So not all things were horrible here. It definitely could have been worse. But that's the end of this one. Hope you enjoyed the story, and as always, have a good one.